Okay. For those of you who are milling around, we do still have a few seats available here. So if you want to come on down, feel free to. You can bring your wine, whatever you like. Just come on down if you'd like. Great. Well, welcome, everybody. I'm Mitchell Kaplan, and on behalf of all of us at Books and Books, I want to welcome you to this very, very special event tonight. All of you I know are familiar with this wonderful new project called the Fashion Project, which is just a couple doors down. And they've become our neighbors and our collaborators. And we couldn't be more thrilled to have them right here up on the third floor, which has become, I think, the cultural wing of the Bal Harbour Shops. And there are a lot of people to thank for this, and probably too many to thank just tonight. But I do want to say that this marvelous fashion project, as well as our existence here, is due to the fact of the wonderful, wonderful support of the Whitman Family Development Group and Bal Harbour Shops. They are remarkable partners, and we are so happy to have them in this community and so happy to be part of that community. The Fashion Project has been under the direction developed by Kathy Leff, who's here somewhere, who's very embarrassed that I'm even pointing her out. And there's Kathy Leff. As well as with the remarkable support and goodwill and vision of someone that I've worked with so many years, and that's Cheryl Stevenson, who's right over here, who does a remarkable job here with the Bal Harbour Shops. But tonight's tonight, and tonight we have what I think is a thrilling program here at the bookstore. And I'll just go into the introductions. Judith Clark, who is overseeing the Fashion Project, is a groundbreaking independent curator and exhibition maker. She's lectured and published widely on dress display, and she's organized more than 40 exhibitions. She's known as one of the most innovative and unconventional curators in this field. She's curated and designed exhibitions on fashion for several museums internationally, among them the Victoria and Albert Museum in London, the Palais de Tokyo in Paris, the Palazzo Pitti in Florence, and this is really, I'm monolingual, so this is really hard for me, to be honest. Her recent projects include collecting, curating, and designing the Simone Handbag Museum in Seoul, and working with the Louis Vuitton Foundation to curate from the archives of Louis Vuitton an historic overview. She's a professor of fashion and museology at UAL in London, and she runs the master's program in fashion curation. She teaches, she writes, and she runs a unit in its history and theory department, and she's with us tonight. So let's give Judith a big welcome. We also have one of the preeminent psychoanalysts in the entire world with us tonight, and that's Adam Phillips. Yes, it's probably all I need to say. He's formerly principal child psychotherapist at Charing Cross Hospital in London. He's a writer and psychoanalyst in private practice. He's the author of 19 books, maybe 20 by the time I finish this introduction. Most recently, One Way and Another, New and Selected Essays, and Becoming Freud. He's the co-author with Judith of the Concise Dictionary of Dress, and he's collaborating with her on a forthcoming exhibition for the Barbican Art Gallery in London. And to conduct the conversation, my good friend Paul Holdengrober is with us. Paul, I should just say parenthetically, I spent many years here in Miami in Coral Gables, and we developed a friendship back then. I, as a bookseller, he as one of my great customers back then as well. He's the founder and director of Live from the New York Public Library, which is celebrating in 2015 its 10th year with over 630 events so far. More to come. Over the past decade, Paul has spoken with everyone from Patti Smith to Zadie Smith, from Ricky Jay to Jay-Z, from Errol Morris to Jan Morris, from Ed Ruscha to Matthew Barney, from Pico Iyer, Christopher Hitchens to Van Cliburn. The world has been in his interviewing chair. So we welcome Paul tonight, and I encourage you, wherever you can, to find him online so you can see what he's doing up at the New York Public Library. Tonight, they'll be talking, the three of them, about dreams, fantasies, and vanity. It'll be a conversation on and about fashion. Please give Paul, Judith, and Adam a big round of applause.
Mitch, thank you so much. I remember that when I went to New York, the then president of the New York Public Library was very pleased to have me come. But then he saw in my moving expenses an item, and he said, you know, 16,000 pounds of books. And he got quite worried. And many of those books were purchased at Books and Books. And he said, and in a moment of humor, he said, you know, Paul, we do have books here. Obviously, they were not exactly my books, and I've always loved the tactile inebriation one gets from books. I still do, the smell and all the feeling one gets. I still very much enjoy being surrounded by them and surrounded by them here. So, Mitch, thank you so much. And I might mention also that we should give a big round of applause to Mitch Kaplan, because Books and Books has been nominated this year as the best independent bookstore in the country. No, nominated and won. I'm sorry. Some people are correcting me already. Cassie Leff, thank you so much for inviting me. Christina Nosti, who works here at Books and Books, thank you so much also for having me. And the Whitman family for sponsoring this event. It's really a great pleasure. So, Judith, let's start with you. I should immediately say, Adam and I have had a conversation over the last 7 or 8 years. It feels like I'm in treatment with him, though often I am asking him questions. But now rather, I'd like to begin with you, and for you to give us an idea of what happened when this project was proposed to you. You were given a sense of extraordinary freedom that
Absolutely.
I don't think institutional places very often give you quite in the same way.
Never.
Institutions are quite heavy. I always say that I would like to make the library levitate, and I know that in the museum world it's the same kind of feeling. So maybe you can tell us how this project came about, and once you had the possibility of doing it, what did you do with it, with that possibility?
Well, it's I wanted to also kind of echo.
Where's the mic, please?
Sorry?
The mic.
I wanted to echo the thanks and to the people listed both by Mitch and Paul, and the relationship with Bal Harbour Shops is very special. You don't imagine to be invited, very often to be invited into such a prestigious environment and given such freedom at the same time. A place with such a specific identity, and an identity that they're confident with such to give such freedom. So I had conversations with Kathy Leff, as was mentioned by Mitch, in terms of the creation of this fashion project a couple of doors down, and it was to create a gallery space in the footprint of a shop, and so it had to define itself both with and against the idea of a retail environment, to celebrate its context, and to work in a way with it and against it.
What does that mean?
Well, it means that if we're walking through Bal Harbour Shops and we're looking at fashion displayed to such an exquisite level here, what else can you say? And I guess this fashion project is all about that. It's about what else might be said about fashion.
So one might speak about nearly the folly of contiguity. In some way, you are right next to places where people can purchase, and you're trying in some way to make people more attentive to what they're seeing.
Maybe. I'm saying that it participates in different histories, and there's the history of retail, and there's the history of the relationship between the museum and dress. And so what Kathy and I discussed was creating an environment that looked at that relationship and the history of that relationship. I call myself an exhibition maker, and that is about the relationship to the built environment around the object, and in this case, dress.
You call yourself an exhibition maker, but at the same time you're a professor of fashion and museology. Now, what might that mean?
I suppose that's just museum studies. It's the art and science of museum studies as applied to fashion.
Something people may not know here is that you grew up in Italy, and you grew up in Rome. And I'm curious what the layered history of Rome created in you, and in what way it had an impact on you for what you're doing now.
Well, it had an impact on lots of different levels. I mean, there's the kind of archaeology of Rome where one style replaces another. Architecturally, which is the most profound analogy. But there's also, with that, a celebration of fashion, which was liberating. And the question is, how do you, maybe combine those two stories?
Unpack the word liberating. How was it liberating?
It was liberating because it didn't need to be earnest, and so you could feel free to celebrate it at any given level you wanted.
Did you take fashion seriously when you were growing up?
I think I did, but I kept on feeling I needed to sort of turn it into a subject, that it needed to be a subject with a capital F.
You wrote to me something that I'd like to quote back to you. You said that your mother laughed out loud at Jardin des Modes when she saw Karl Lagerfeld's surrealist garments for Chloe. What was she laughing at?
I think she was laughing at the idea, not laughing at, but laughing with, let's say. She was participating in a joke that had been activated by a dress, if you see what I mean, that was contained within a dress. So she found that there was something clever and something humorous within a dress. And it just was a very vivid memory for me, that a dress could do something to somebody, and in this case, my mother. And it was as though something was being validated.
You have also said that you use dress to talk about other things. What other things?
I think anything. Because you're staging kind of human drama in a way. It's anthropocentric. It's a clothed body, and therefore it's clothed, everyday life in all its dimensions.
What other things for you that do clothes inspire, Adam?
Well, all these thoughts are inspired by knowing Judith. Because before I knew Judith, I didn't think about clothes. But once I saw her work and got to know her, I realized that actually, the most obvious, I suppose, point is that we're spoken to before we speak, and we're dressed before we dress, as children. And everybody remembers, I think, something about the conflict about being dressed by one's parents. In other words, this is a basic initiation into the regime of adult life. So it seems to me, whatever one's feelings about clothes are, at one end of the spectrum, I don't care about them, and at the other end, they are the passion of one's life. It's going to be something about that original struggle. I don't mean this explains it, I just mean it's an ingredient. The other thing I think is that, as Judith said, it is a language. I think children spend a lot of time wondering what's going on in their parents' minds, and especially their mothers' minds initially. And of course, their mother's clothes are very fundamental forms of self-expression. So I think they're very powerfully evocative objects before you think about them being evocative. You just think, this is what your mother wears. But of course she selected these clothes from a whole range of other clothes. And of course you don't know that at the time. She's also selected your clothes from a whole range of other clothes. And so clearly how one is dressed is part of initially her fantasy about who she thinks you are. Well, these are really powerful communications, I think.
You know, I have two sons, and one until very recently, until he turned about 9, mainly wore pink. But actually, nobody made fun of him, which we were very relieved.
That's good.
They didn't. And I always felt that he had an incredible sense of style, until my wife told me, you know, he doesn't. It's really my style. Is that in some sense what you're saying?
I think we need to talk about that later.
Okay. Oh, good. I got something out of this conversation. I'm ever so pleased. So you studied architecture.
I did.
And how would you say that this experience and this training informed your idea of fashion?
I'm not sure it informed my idea of fashion, but it created a structure within which to think about the history of design, within which obviously fashion sits. And architecture can be spoken about in a way that is much more, certainly then, in more earnest terms than fashion.
It's more serious of a study.
Yeah, well, it was perhaps considered such. And so a lot of my studies was about sort of slotting architecture into a kind of history of ideas, which inevitably you do when you're studying architecture. And so I found myself making those parallels with fashion a lot and finding ways of looking at dress in very specific periods. So, for example, I chose to study the constructivist architects, and I think why I was so interested in constructivist architecture was because the architects were designing clothing as well as their environment. So the interest is very, has been there for many, many years. But I was using architecture as a way round, I think.
Way around.
Getting to study fashion. I think it was sort of taking the history of design and working my way towards the history of dress, perhaps. The other way it informs my practice, which I think is evident in the project a few doors down, is that working as an exhibition maker, you are designing the structure of the exhibition. So I'm also practicing still.
And you're intensely using space.
Exactly. You're manipulating scale, aren't you? When you're an architect and you've designed something, the figure in the sketch gives the building intelligibility. It gives it scale. You understand whether it's a Gothic, vertical space or a classical even space or whatever it is you're doing. The figure is the key. Well, in a way, when you're exhibiting dress, you start with that figure and you build up a kind of impression of space or an experience of space around that figure.
What strikes me in the exhibition space next door is how intense the space is, how charged, how it obliges us to be attentive in a certain way. Do you think I'm onto something by saying that?
I think you're onto something. I think it's very difficult to kind of describe to you how that may have come about or how that might be done.
Try.
I mean, I think
try because I think no, try because I think actually describing it will be helpful. In part because I think that there is intention and non-intention in what you're doing.
I mean, I think in part if you're curating or if you're interested in the history of curating, you're interested in the history of attention, aren't you? Because it's a history of looking and of directing the gaze. You're asking somebody to come into a space and look at these objects in this order. So it demands attention by its very discipline, is about that. Then how I use that, it's very difficult to know oneself.
What is that exact line of William James I so much love? Experience is what you pay attention to. My experience is what I pay attention to. Adam, you look quizzical, but I'm not.
No, I just, I mean, I don't speak on your behalf, obviously,
but do a little bit.
No, I won't do it at all. To me, Judith's work is they're more like installations. It seems to me they are both beautiful and very evocative. And I think it's very unusual in the cultures we live in to come across objects that you can't eat, befriend, or buy. And that's very extraordinary. So effectively, it's a non-acquisitive, I think really profoundly kind of countercultural form of education. Because all you can do is go down there and look at those objects. Now, you may be more or less informed, but what you'll be left with is whatever they evoke in you. And that, I think, is really powerful and interesting. Because in a way, you can't do anything with it, except see what you find yourself thinking about it, feeling.
So it's purely about suggestion.
It's about evocation. It may be about information as well, but I think initially it's about evocation.
I mean, I think something that was interesting for me today is we had a series of talks in the gallery today, or tours, let's say, mini tours that I was giving. And I realized how differently I described it every time I went through. There was the kind of party line in terms of what explicitly the exhibition was about, but I also found myself describing it differently and kind of as though noticing other things about it or remembering different things about it as I went along, as though if I'd sort of stayed in the gallery and given 10 more tours, I would have given 10 different accounts of it. And I think there's a sense in which in kind of visiting museums, someone expects to be given a kind of truth, as though there's, the object and the caption, and everybody's agreed as to what we're going to learn from this object and caption combination. And I find that very sort of unsettling. And so I'm very loath to...
This is unsettling in a different way.
But I'm very loath to kind of say, what is intended by any given exhibition or installation, perhaps for that reason, as though I really don't want it to be kind of shut down before the visitor kind of makes up their own mind about it.
You speak quite beautifully about the unknowability of impact. Is that what you mean?
Yes.
That you don't, you go in and you bring to it whatever knowledge you might have. And having more knowledge may not be better or less, it may be helpful or not helpful. Is that true?
Yes, I think it is. And I mean, as Adam says, it's such an early, powerful experience people have with dress that inevitably things are evoked that we couldn't possibly know in the visitor.
This conversation was, did you want to say something?
No, only that histories are evoked too, because one of the amazing things about clothes, as I've understood from you, is what incredible historians clothes designers are, because they have the most incredible knowledge of the history of fashion. So that a dress, say, is an amazing piece of history. Now, you may or may not know that, and you don't need to know it, and that's rather wonderful too. You don't need to know that to get pleasure from it. But you could also find that out if you wanted to. So the object is really powerful in lots of different ways, but it gives a great range of different pleasures.
This conversation was advertised as dreams, fantasies, vanity. Help me with these words.
What kind of help would you like?
The best kind. I think it might be good to start with dreams, Adam.
Well, I think there's a sense in which, without sort of overplaying this, that the objects in the exhibition down there are like dream objects in the sense that obviously they're staged. I mean, they may be staged by Judith and her team, but they are going to have an impact that is unpredictable. The other thing you'll notice is that there's a minimal amount of caption. So as Judith said, you're not being told a tendentious, over-organized story. But I think anybody would see, looking at that exhibition, that something is being told, even if you don't know what it is. And it seems to me that the objects are not like images in dreams, but they are akin to images in dreams in the sense that they are very, very suggestive. And they're, if you like them, they're very, very pleasurable, but they're very enigmatic. So if somebody said to you, what do you think of this dress? You might be able to say one or two things, but unless you've been educated in the field, I think you'd be hard-pressed to be able to say that, to say what got to you, but something will have got to you. And that's like an image in a dream. You think, there's something in this and I don't know what it is, and it's alluring in some way.
Does this resonate with you?
I don't know, because I think I'm too bound up with what it is I'm trying to say, even though I'm not saying it explicitly, if you see what I mean. So for me, it's kind of layered, and lots of it is layered in a very personal way that inevitably, but I'm not creating dreamscapes, if you see what I mean. I think that's something that comes later. I don't think you can. It's in the way that you can't program a dream. You know, it's not something that you can kind of consciously construct.
What about the word vanity?
Can we just say one more thing?
About dreams?
Well, I just think it is interesting, the thing that you can't program a dream, you can't arrange one. And in a way, the risk of a kind of old-fashioned kind of exhibition is that it is arranging a dream for you. It's telling you what the story is. And I think one of the things about Judith's work is it does and doesn't tell you what the story is.
It resists it.
It resists it, and it gives you enough. But I think vanity is a very interesting subject.
Before we get to, I mean, it is an incredibly interesting subject. But before we get to it, what you described as what dreams giving you enough, just enough, in this, it seems like what you were describing is successful pleasure in some way.
Yes, if it gives you pleasure, it's successful. If you go to that exhibition and something strikes you, something's happened. You don't know what it is, but something's happened.
So vanity.
I think it's a shame it's a pejorative. I think it's a shame that people are not free to take pleasure in the things about themselves they love. And people very, very rarely will talk about the things about themselves they love and like and want to be admired for. It seems to me a shame. It's also, of course, mostly referred to, it's mostly ascribed to women. And this can't be an accident. So I think there's a lot in it, because it's very striking in terms of the idea of fashion. Because one thing that I've noticed is that people feel a bit about fashion as they do about psychoanalysis. They either think it's fraudulent and exploitative, or they think it's one of the best things going. And this is quite interesting in and of itself. And there's a fantasy about the vanity of psychoanalysts, and of course the vanity of people who are preoccupied by clothes. And it could be that actually one of the problems is that everybody knows these people are getting really quite a lot of pleasure from what they do. And that's a problem. That's where the suspicion is. That somebody who really is interested in clothes is getting a lot of pleasure from them. And so it's got to be trivialized or diminished in some way.
Adam, you wrote in the Concise Dictionary of Dress, the reason that people are disdainful of fashion is that they fear that many of the things they value most in their lives may be more like fashion than anything else.
Yeah, I think that's true. I mean, if you grow up in a culture that assumes that duration over time equals value, then fashion is going to be a big problem. Because it would be very disturbing to some people to think that actually the things they love and like are very, very contingent and accidental. And actually, everybody at some level is preoccupied by the next best thing. it gives us hope in the future. Fashion makes us believe there will be something better. Well, what could be better?
Judith, there's a line of Oscar Wilde I've always loved, and I wonder how you would react to it. He says, "It is only superficial people who do not judge by appearance." How does that strike you?
Well, I mean, it may or may not be true, but we do know how powerful it is, and we do know how profound it is. You know, and I think by now the language is so broad in relation to identity and to all its many kind of incarnations that it's a line that in a way couldn't be said anymore with such impact, because it's already been unpacked so much.
It still remains a time bomb in some way.
It does remain a time bomb, but I think it's sort of, for me, there are the kind of analogies that I'm trying to set up are about that in relation to museum practice, in terms of how fashion within museums has been made banal and judged, you know, and whether it kind of makes it onto, you know, the first floor of the Met rather than in the basement.
What, I mean, you're working against in some way, or with the idea that the museum does things differently than you do. What in this particular project, in the first of what is an ongoing project that will happen over a year or more, what is it that you're trying to do with this configuration of 6 themes, as it were?
That is distinct
Yes,
from
museum practice.
Well, I think the luxury of working in a space such as this, and what I was referring to earlier, I think, as a form of freedom, is that, and why we kind of set it up as a gallery as opposed to anything else. And the importance of the word gallery is that then the museum practice can be in inverted commas, which is why the Victorian cabinets, etc. So it's kind of staged as a museum cabinet. The museum bit can be at one remove. And so what this series of cabinets attempts to do is look at museum practice from the outside, and look at it as a fashion, as something that responds to fashion. So one of the things that evolves within the exhibition with every installation is that the cabinet, and therefore the kind of implied museum practice, is being reimagined and re-remembered, because it's about remembering practice and remembering dress through the frame of different kind of museum experiences, you know, which set particular dress, you know, in a particular frame, often defined by the museum.
Is the exhibition, with all its intensity, ironic and humorous?
It is, yes.
In what way?
Well, it is in that it kind of dramatizes it. It attempts not to be too earnest, even though it's earnest as a subject. It attempts to kind of be light-hearted. So, for example, there's a cabinet, I don't know how many people have seen the exhibition, but there's a cabinet where there's a Tyvek cover to a Victorian dress that is in fact made of bubble wrap underneath. There isn't a Victorian dress under the cover for the Victorian dress.
I tried to actually look.
I know you nearly hit your head on the cabinet.
There's a little part of what would seem like a leg. And I looked carefully, and the cabinet is enclosed, so you can't see anything. I would imagine that's very intentional.
Exactly, and it's kind of saying, you know, the Victorians were preoccupied with creating these wonderful museums. They were collecting things, they were caring for them, but they were caring for them so much that they kind of obscured the object entirely. So it's kind of, how far do you take the conservation project when you take the object out of the public gaze completely?
It seems that the exhibition is also, in a way, kindred to what Adam does in his written work, which is the essay form.
Yes.
There is something about this exhibition that works very much in the way that essays work for you. Is that right, Adam?
I think it is. I mean, now you say it,
Yeah,
it sounds right to me.
It does?
Yeah.
In what way?
Well, that there's, I suppose, partly by intention, there's, in a way, a brief circumference. It's a small, hived-off area, and it's experimental, in the sense of it's not over-consciously intended, but it is about real preoccupations. And it doesn't demand excessive, grandiose attention. So you can zip through it, and you can concentrate on the odd sentence. But you can choose your details, you can choose your preferred details. And ideally, you don't need to, as it were, remember the plot. I mean, I could go on, but...
Go on a little bit more, because I think in a way what you're speaking about, at least what I'm hearing, is it doesn't really matter if what you have read you remember, if it's given you something.
Well, it's neither free association nor is it without logic, if you see what I mean. So there are presumably intentional patterns at work. I don't want to speak for you now, but there are intentional patterns at work, but there are things that turn up in the doing of it. And in a way, it's as though the form is an opportunity for something else to turn up, and that's the pleasure of doing it.
An anthropologist at Princeton named James Boone wrote a marvelous article called "Museums Make Me Sad."
Well,
do they inspire that in you? A melancholy, a feeling that they're bits and pieces of the past, they're strewn. And
yes and no. I mean, there's a sense with curating dress, which is always about where has everybody gone, and a sense of loss, in that a lot of the dresses that we look at, a lot of the historic dresses that we're looking at, the people who owned them have died. So there's something very immediate about that, in a way that is distinct from, for example, Venice. You know, that there's a kind of...
Venice is sinking. Yeah. So in a way there is something...
But there's a sense of loss that is very immediate. The body is not there. So there's a sense of unease with exhibitions of dress, of what to do with the dress when we don't have a living body within it that is, you know, its reason for being. And so there's a lot of kind of wondering about that, both if you stand it upright or whether you lay it flat, has equally kind of powerful sense of loss. But do museums make me sad? No.
The opposite.
Do they make you sad?
No, they don't make me sad, but I don't know if it was true in America, but in England, if you went to provincial museums, there was always a little dress section. And it was always bizarre, because everything looked sort of slightly mouldy, and you sort of thought it was the bit of the museum that everybody just walked through. And it had a strange quality about it, because, of course, you realised that once real people had worn these things. It was a bit as though no one quite knew what to do with them. And yet they were evocative of a life. I mean, somebody actually lived a life in these clothes. And that, I think, is something that's happened, presumably, in your lifetime. That this has gone from being a strange provincial, what do we do with this old stuff other than conserve it, to actually how it could be used and recycled.
I'll read something back to you, Judith, which I think is very apropos. You say, exhibitions are opportunities for translation, but as questions reveal, there's also a murder, a death of the garment in synchronicity with its own time, according to its own use. The museum is a for as soon as possible. In recent practice, as soon as the model takes off the gown at the end of the catwalk, it is taken by the museum and preserved. It is preserved before it has had time to live. The more extreme and now more valuable contemporary gowns are commissioned by museums, bypassing even the body. Designed for exhibition, how much intention can be stored? If the context is interrupted, where is the line drawn around the garment? I think that's so fascinating.
Well, I mean, I think we have an illustration of that in the exhibition, in the Hussein Chalayan dress, which is the last object in the series of displays. because in a way it is such an object. It's an object that was commissioned for display, not to be worn, so it did bypass the wearer. So even though it's built to human proportions, you wonder why this is still important, why it still has to be a blueprint for a future dress. And therefore, if a museum is storing it, what is it storing? Because if it's not storing a history of the everyday, what other agendas are implicated in this? And so it was important for me to have such an object in this series, because it moves from recording the everyday, preserving the everyday, deciphering the everyday, to creating something that creates a completely different agenda around it. And there is a question mark about what we are storing for posterity, I guess.
What and why?
What and why?
Why bother having all of that stuff around?
Well, I guess it's a different kind of archive, isn't it? It's archiving a history of creativity associated with the body, but not necessarily kind of enslaved to its needs.
To its utilitarian needs.
Yeah.
Or presumably you could have a pragmatic answer, which is the reason to keep it is to see what you can make out of it, because you never know what you might be able to transform it into.
Because with museums, of course, it's always about what those what those objects are at the service of. If are they at the service of inspiration? So are they always at the service of future design?
You're going to continue this project, and in a subsequent exhibition, you will be exploring the history of mannequin design. It sounds fascinating, but what does that mean?
Not exactly explicitly, but one of the things that these series will be exploring is mannequin design. I mean, it's kind of, there's a very, there are kind of supposedly limited tools. You've got the mannequin, you've got a cabinet or plinth, you have your space, you have your spotlight. There's sort of the tools associated with dress and exhibition making are limited. And I think one of the things that this project draws attention to in a kind of episodic way is looking again at those tools, one of which is of course the mannequins, and the opportunity for styling. As a curator, you need to support a dress to kind of conservation standards, let's say, but then you have the head. And curators, there's been a kind of dilemma about what to do with the head, whether to take off the head and have it as a so-called kind of minimalist display, but then you lose the proportions of the body for which this gown has been created.
But many of the exhibitions in the room next door are beheaded.
One of them, yes.
Two.
Yes, true. One is kind of explicitly
yeah.
beheaded, and one is without a mannequin head. But that again shows fashions in display.
Adam, you were saying that before meeting Judith, you had no interest in fashion. Now you have greater interest in fashion. What did you learn from Judith?
Well, I think I said a bit about this at the beginning, and some of it is obviously not for public consumption, but the bit that would be something along the lines of having a sense of a language in a way that's more as powerful as words, that is entirely material, that is to do with clothes. So it's a bit like a world of things that you just took for granted. I took for granted. I didn't think about clothes as either being a language or being objects of particular interest. Of course, like everybody else, I was struck when I thought people dressed well. But it wasn't something I knew anybody talked about in any way. And it was like a completely new world of things. And when you see it, it's, to me anyway, astounding. I mean, you look at Renaissance paintings, they're like fashion shows. I mean, I never thought that. But once you think about clothes, you see clothes everywhere, if you see what I mean. And you realize that this has got to be a very fundamental way of living in the world.
Was it also because speaking about clothes seemed vain and taboo in some sense?
Trivial. And that's, I think, the point, in a way. A lot of things that are really of great value begin as trivialized objects. They begin as the kind of things we couldn't possibly be bothered to talk about or be interested in. Or only superficial people would be interested in this, which would be another way of dealing with it. But then, of course, I mean, it's like the wild quote. The question is, what is a superficial person? How do you know one when you meet one? I mean, this is a very... it's a ludicrous idea. Everybody's equally deep. Or everybody's equally shallow. I mean, who cares?
I mean, we all have skin.
We all have skin, and we all have parents, and we all have unchosen bodies. And so one of the questions, this is another thing, this really interests me, even though this may be obvious to a lot of people, and I'm sure it's obvious to you, but I think it's really interesting why female bodies require so much adornment. In other words, just simply, what is the fear about femaleness that have produced this amazing proliferation of imaginative artworks around female bodies? That seems to me to be really amazing and interesting. And I would imagine there's a lot of fear in it, and somewhere a lot of misogyny in it, a lot of anxiety in it. Because actually, if you're interested in fashion, you have access to the most amazing range of modern artifacts. The most incredible things, clothes are being made all around us. It's astounding.
So much effort.
Or so much imagination.
I mean, what strikes me is how the seriousness of your intent in this exhibition. I mean, we spoke about frivolity, but it seems at the same time that it's humorous and that there's irony, there's great seriousness.
But maybe with dress you have to work that little bit harder, in the sense that such is a kind of obstinate desire to say something about something that is important, but that has had such a bad press.
So is your work in some way to rehabilitate dress?
No, because it's I'm certainly not the first to say that, and there are great dress historians, theoreticians, etc. But I think that still it's as though, I mean, the interesting thing to me is that we're still having this conversation at all, in the sense that we still need to somehow underline its seriousness. That's interesting to me. When people sort of say, laugh, because my title is, Professor of Fashion and Museology, and in part, the choice of the word museology was intentional to kind of make it more serious. It's as though if you put an ology on the end of something, it kind of counts, because otherwise I really wouldn't be a professor. Well, actually, I've been studying this subject for 20 years, but without the ology, it was a little weak. And people joke about it, and of course, but it's also kind of true. Yeah. It's kind of funny and not quite so funny at the same time. But it is astonishing to me that we still have to say it. And Valerie Steele, anecdotes, the director of the Fashion Institute of Technology in New York, often tells an anecdote about being at Yale, and there being huge kind of criticism of her desire to submit a thesis on dress.
One of the characters in Alice in Wonderland, I can't remember who it is, I think it's the Dodo, says, the best way to explain it is to do it. And it seems to me, you could think of this very simply, which is, what kind of conversations do clothes evoke in you? What kind of conversations do you want to have after looking at clothes? You might not want to have any. But if you live in a culture, as we do now, where people begin to have conversations, it all comes to light. You realize how interesting it is. What are the words evoked by clothes? Which is a version of, what are the words evoked by bodies?
What did you learn from Adam in the process of introducing him to what really didn't interest him at first?
I learnt from Adam to never know what I was doing, to never believe that I knew what I was doing explicitly, and that it might always be about something else in the best sense. In the best sense, to not believe in my intentions, but to enjoy them nevertheless. And so, with
I like that. I like that. That's very interesting. To enjoy them despite everything.
well, despite not being clear about it, that to be clear about something might be a problem. You know, to be absolutely clear about what you want to teach someone may be restricting them, and that we do that to ourselves. So to not have, to perhaps be suspicious of a project that is too clear.
Gives you license.
Mm.
I'd like to, in closing, read a little passage from Stephen Greenblatt for you. Have you comment on it? It's called It's an article he wrote, part of a book called Resonance and Wonder, and I'll read the first paragraph, and maybe you can tell us a little bit on which side you find yourself, or if in fact you inhabit both. I propose to examine two distinct models for the exhibition of works of art, one centered on what I shall call resonance and the other on wonder. By resonance, I mean the power of the displayed object to reach out beyond its formal boundaries to a larger world, to evoke in the viewer the complex, dynamic, cultural forces from which it has emerged and from which it may be taken by a viewer to stand. By wonder, I mean the power of the displayed object to stop the viewer in his or her tracks, to convey an arresting sense of uniqueness, to evoke an exalted attention.
I know and love that essay, but I think it's both. I wish I could tell you that it was one or the other, but it's both for many reasons. I mean, there's one of the strangenesses about fashion is about the fact of it being multiples often. And so within the museum, there are those two extremes. Well, multiples in many ways. It's about whether you're really reinforcing the everydayness of a piece such that it is representative of its time, which of course with dress was a huge part of the project. The more typical the dress, historically, the more it would tell us about its time, the more it would tell us about its context, the more clues we could derive from it. Now it's much more about the specialness of the object and a kind of cult of genius. And this, I mean, Stephen Greenblatt was not talking about dress in that essay, so I'm slightly shifting his boundary, his focus. So I'm just using it as an excuse. But the thing that is now such a preoccupation with dress in museums is this cult of specialness and cult of uniqueness, and of kind of genius in relation to the designer. And so I think that is a very important shift. It's no longer, and you can see it from the titles of exhibitions. You know, it used to be kind of, you know, the glory of 19th century dress, and now it's Alexander McQueen. You know, it's something that is completely different within what
celebrity.
Well, of creative genius. I mean, celebrity is a whole other conversation, which we certainly don't have time to embark on this evening. But yes, I think that's true. I mean, the thing about the exhibition is that what I've tried to do is, in a way, to signal that, and to use both. A gentleman came into the gallery this afternoon who was almost moved to tears because he was in the presence of a Schiaparelli cape. And that he loved Schiaparelli, had loved Schiaparelli all his life, and suddenly was in the presence of a Schiaparelli. And so it was that kind of sense of wonder, you know, that it was I am now, how do I behave in the presence of something that comes with so much anticipation because of its specialness, not because it was typical.
So it has, I mean, in this particular case, one can really say it has an aura.
Absolutely. And so the exhibition plays with both. There's an original Leon Bakst Ballet Russe costume, which might have the same effect on a viewer.
Most of these objects are yours. So, Adam, you have in fact lived with them.
I have.
So, how is it for you to be going to Bal Harbour to see your daily life exhibited in a precious context in a very sophisticated shopping mall?
Well, it's rather wonderful just to see these objects recontextualized and put in different selections. It doesn't feel like our private life is being exposed, so to speak, at all. But these objects are powerfully evocative for us personally, but also, of course, it's part of a shared world. And some of them are very, very extraordinary. I mean, in terms of the Stephen Greenblatt thing, I mean, if I had to choose, I'd choose wonder, because I'd rather be struck than informed. And I think the thing about those objects, even though they come from our home in a certain sense, is that they're all, I think, striking. If you happen to know about them, they're, of course, extremely interesting too.
I mean, what you're also saying is that if we had to choose between two experiences, what we would love more is to be arrested.
Yeah,
to
I
be
would.
Stopped in our paths.
Yeah.
But in some way, that's the hardest thing.
Well, it's uncalculable. In other words, no one can arrange to stop you in your tracks. But if you happen to be stopped in your tracks, it is an amazing thing.
You know that line of Kierkegaard where he says that the goal is to arrive at immediacy after reflection, which in a sense is what it's about. Is that
That's good.
you might know all of this, but in a way you want to get rid of it. Or you can't really get rid of it, but you hope somehow.
Yeah, that's the best
to
thing you said about it. I think we need to. That for me summarizes it, because it's
you want us to stop with that.
I
image.
want that
We should.
image.
You want that
Yes.
image. Can you leave me with something about that image? Add something to that image.
No, I think that's what it's about. That's what it's about. It's about, for whatever reason, that of course predates the encounter. And that's the bit that we don't know what that preparation is. You know, we don't know what the preparation for the encounter is.
And that's what you experienced in a sense with that gentleman who came this afternoon.
Exactly.
He had that encounter.
Because I think the word that we haven't used is beauty. That hasn't been used this evening is beauty. And the question is whether he was struck, whether he was so moved by the beauty of the Cape, or by the fact that he was in the presence of a Schiaparelli Cape, because of a shared language and a shared passion that he and I perhaps happened to have. You know, that provoked putting the Schiaparelli Cape there as a significant object, and coming to that object with everything that he imagined about Schiaparelli's artistic practice, and the importance of it, such that an encounter with it would have that effect.
An encounter also with uniqueness.
Yes, with specialness maybe, with a sense of specialness for him, not for everybody, but for him. What is our sense of what it would be to encounter something special?
So let's end with the word special. Thank you very much. So, what what we're going to do now is take some questions. In my experience, questions can be formulated in about 52 seconds at most. And I prefer getting good questions. And if you can speak up, I'll try to repeat whatever it is you might be saying.
So I have 52 seconds to pose the question, or no. The coincidence of your practice being here at the moment that the New York exhibit is creating such controversy of the appropriateness or validity of clothing, costumes, ephemera as art. The response?
Bjork exhibition causing great unrest in New York to the point that they would like to fire the curator and close the exhibit and fire the curator. Your reaction to that?
Well, my reaction to that is that there has so frequently been these controversies around exhibitions where dress is, and certainly contemporary dress is a part of it.
The dress is charged.
It's charged. I mean, it could be condemning Diana Vreeland at the Met in the 70s. It could be a kind of reiteration of some of those criticisms. So it's a well-rehearsed critique, and people have their own mind about it. But it's a very trodden path.
You haven't seen the exhibition?
I haven't seen the Bjork exhibition, but I know of it, of course.
But I'm also so interested by how much passion and fervor goes into. I don't know if it's art or if it. I mean, there seems to be a fine line between appreciation and burning.
But it's this kind of morality around categories, isn't it? It's as though if something is miscategorized, that it's a cosmic proportions, rather than allowing something to exist within its own distinct category, and Björk to exist within her own distinct practice, and that might be interesting for all kinds of different reasons. But the minute that something is so-called hailed as art, as fashion, has. I don't think fashion is art, by the way. But I think it's an interesting dialogue. I think it's interesting that anyone would bother trying to recategorize something, and so that's to me what is interesting about this, and the kind of fervor of the morality around these debates.
That being said, being a Philistine, I actually like the exhibit very much, and actually further to some of the things that you've said, people are still standing in line for hours to see it.
So someone is interested. Someone is interested in it.
I'll go around. I'm not giving preference. I will take this question, then I'll take that question, and then I'll take another question. Go ahead.
I would like to know from the two of you, what are the essentials of modern clothes? I looked at one of the exhibits, and you look at it, and it's also elaborate now, and obviously that is not the case today. Why is it not anymore like that? I mean, except for economic reasons and so on, men and labor becoming more expensive, but that I think is not to the.
So the essential elements of modern clothing.
Oh, can you?
The essential quality of modern clothing.
Do you want to try?
Well, I'm certainly not informed enough to be able to answer that question, I'm afraid. But perhaps I'm not afraid.
I'm not sure it's answerable because of the many voices that make up that kind of prediction, if you see what I mean. I'm not sure whether I've understood your question adequately, but I think it depends what you mean by essential, as in what we need, as opposed to what we want. Is that essential?
Well, that is part of it, I would say. But what strikes me is that today we don't strive for that glamour and glory, or just under certain circumstances we do. Whereas before, that was obviously something that everybody strived. Not everybody had the means to accomplish it. So I wonder, why is that?
Glamour in the past as opposed to not having glamour now, or only on certain special occasions. I'm not even sure that's true, but what do you think?
Well, I think there's a lot of glamour in Bal Harbour shops. I think we're surrounded by a lot of glamour, a lot of aspiration, a lot of kind of dream work is being done in the very context of this conversation, which makes it so interesting having this conversation here.
Which leads me to wonder to what effect you think, I know you can't quite say, but what effect you think the exhibition will have on what surrounds it?
I'm not sure it has a desire to affect what surrounds it, because we're being hosted here to raise questions, not answer them, in a way. I think we're raising, and with the Fashion Project, our great hope is to raise a lot more questions than we can answer around this discipline. I mean, a lot of pieces that are being sold here are museum worthy, aren't they? I mean, they are. There is something. We are dealing with kind of special dress, special design of a very glamorous nature.
But something does happen. I remember I spent 2 hours up here yesterday, and when we saw the shops downstairs, I looked at those mannequins in a different way. I don't know what, but they seemed different. They seemed altered. I don't know if they seemed altered or I felt altered. Question back there.
I wanted to know if Adam remembered what Judith was wearing when he met her, and vice versa.
The answer to that is I do.
Wanted to know what you were wearing.
No, I don't think that was the question.
No.
The question was, do I remember? And the answer is yes, I do.
You do. Is that?
That is the answer.
And yes, I do.
We do. Yeah, exactly. We do.
Well, the virtue of the answer is its concision.
But it is an interesting question,
Yeah.
because
yeah.
Clearly one's first impression of somebody, what one selects out to remember, is going to be of some significance. But certainly in terms of thinking of first meetings, it must be of some interest if one is struck by not only the face of someone, or not only the tone of their voice, or whatever.
I mean, that truly goes back to the wild line.
Absolutely.
I mean, just because it's the first impression. And I remember so clearly that when I was about 7 or 8 years old, my father taught me how to shake a hand. He demonstrated it. And I remember him saying it's so important what impression you give, and of course.
But isn't it interesting, the idea that somebody thinks they can actually arrange an impression?
Right.
Because presumably there's something of this in the clothes one wears. One is trying to control what goes on in somebody else's mind about you. We're trying to hold people's attention, and we're trying to get them to think certain things about us and not think other things about us. But actually, of course, it's incalculable. Really, we never know what other people are going to make of us. And that's the strange drama of it.
Back there. You may.
How do you feel about the way, or how do you think the red carpet experience has affected fashion in that the dress has become more important and the actress inside the dress?
Well, I think let's support Reese Witherspoon on that one, who this year said, ask me a question. So I think in solidarity with her, we need to ask other questions of the women who are playing these wonderful roles.
Did you have a question? I didn't hear.
What inspired you to write the books that you wrote?
On
What
the table.
inspired you?
Well, it's very hard to know that, actually, because the experience is, I just find myself writing certain kinds of books. And if you try and go back to find out what actually got you going in the first place, you often don't know and can't really tell. So something happens to you, or you overhear something, or you think something, and it could be years later, you find yourself writing a certain kind of book, but you never really know where it started. That's my experience.
Do you like writing?
Please.
Adam, you made a comment about vanity that stuck in my head a bit and said, is it a shame that people are not allowed to say the good things about themselves? Don't you think vanity has a cultural component if you ever sat next to an American on an international flight?
Yes, but of course, but I think that in a way it's a shame that that kind of cultural, because of course lots of people could say things like that about Americans. But I think one of the wonderful things about Americans, if they actually exist, is that they do talk about themselves with some celebration. I think that's a great cultural quality. Now, of course, it can be the most boring thing on earth, but so can modesty. I mean, it's not as though self-deprecation is fascinating either. So if I had to choose, I would go for self-celebration, but obviously as eloquently as possible. But I think people should be able to get pleasure from who they happen to be, and they needn't have blind spots about the things about themselves they enjoy. Just that.
But I mean, the self-celebration can also become a form of staging oneself.
Only
So be
superficial
it.
people are impressed by anything other than appearances. I mean, why not stage oneself? The only problem is if it's a bad performance. It's not that it's a performance.
So are you making there a comment against, not against, but in opposition to life as lived in England?
Yes. I mean, put like that, yes.
Yeah.
You said that you don't think of fashion as art, which I think is a really interesting statement, especially since you're so obsessed and interested in museology. So what is the charge that happens by taking something that is not necessarily considered an art, but putting it in the very settings in which we receive and think about art? I mean, is it at all?
But that's the interesting part about it for me.
Do Chomsky in charge of putting the object in the frame that will force us to pay attention to it like as if it were art, or you don't want us to, you're not trying to make us think of it as art even if it's not?
Do you need to repeat?
It's complex. It's complex.
Why fashion's not art?
Why is fashion not art? And are you
No,
trying
I
to
just meant for
yeah.
the...
Yeah, no, I'm doing it for everybody. Why is fashion not art? And are you complicating that by creating, in fact, a space which looks like we might be looking at art? Might not
That's
be
what
quite
interests
you said,
me.
but
The thing is, it's back to the kind of category error, so to speak, in that do you need to call it art in order to treat it in this way within the museum? And you have so many kind of hauntings of display that is a history of displaying art within museums. And these are our histories. There aren't lots of history books of how to display fashion in the museum, of, fashion museology. Those books are not, readily available. What we do have are histories of framing objects within an exhibition space. And that traditionally, of course, places an art object in a museum space. And so we're kind of stuck with the histories that we have For me, it's how to harness those histories in an interesting way that doesn't necessarily recategorize the object, but allows it to exist within its own, you know, modes of existence, and multiples in a different way. Because yes, you can look at Duchamp, but fashion again is something else again, with all its commercial motivations. But does that disqualify it from being looked at in a particular way? I don't know. But it is certainly a kind of confused, you know, landscape. But I think what the fashion and art, you know, great debate was about a shortcut. It was saying, we're just going to do this anyway. You know, we're going to say that these objects are important, and we don't know about fashion because that's a bit superficial, therefore we're going to call it art. And some people qualify and some people not. You know, don't. There's a kind of, you know, the T-shirt over here, the Alexander McQueen outfit over there, as though, you know, these are such different landscapes. You know, we all know what we're talking about. Well, I don't know we all know what we're talking about. But do I want to use the languages of display that have been applied to art? Yes, because I think we're eloquent enough about those and around those for it to be helpful, for the frame to somehow be still helpful to us when looking at something.
I'm so interested by the word haunting. How do you understand that word in the context of fashion and fashion display?
Differently with fashion and fashion display. With fashion, it's their distinct histories. But there was an exhibition that I designed at the Boijmans van Beuningen Museum in Rotterdam, where who's a curator, visited recently within a kind of dialogue around installation art and display, where I placed the objects in the places where he had placed the works of art, but kind of, you know, without saying it. But it was as though I wanted to look at that space through that history. And so there are kind of ways in which it's useful to me in ways that I don't know.
Animating, it's ghostly.
Something like that, where gallery spaces themselves are like presences. You know, that you're so used to looking at gallery spaces populated with objects. You very rarely see in a kind of art history book an empty gallery. You see it populated, and so there are some pictures that really have, you know, create a powerful imprint in your mind, such that when you visit the space, you're living that space through those photographs, through the photographic, you know, archive of the exhibitions that have been staged in that space, and that is very interesting to me.
Shall we take one more excellent question?
About a month ago, Lee Adelfort said that fashion is dead. How does that resonate with you, if at all?
Fashion is dead. I'm not sure I heard who, but some. Yes, fashion is dead, but how does that resonate with you? I'm always very skeptical of things being dead.
Things are always being dead, aren't they?
Yeah.
Yes,
I mean, art has been dead for Hegel so long, and it's very slow. Yeah.
I don't think it's dead. I don't think moments like that can be called. You know, I mean, I think it's a false drama.
Yeah, why do people say these things? I mean, we're all going to be dead.
I'd like to end on a different note. Who can
There's
dramatically change the subject? Go ahead.
man there.
If you will for a second consider potentially architecture and the idea of kind of primitive architecture being very functional, and the beginnings of clothing being very functional. If you think about architecture as an exterior idea, but then as one starts to study architecture, the idea of the interior space actually becomes the kind of the qualities within which we understand and appreciate architecture. If there's the exterior, the surface orientation of let's say, fashion, what is the interior of fashion? And that's just kind of a thought. I don't know if there's an answer, but I'd like to, as somebody who works within architecture and fashion, I'd like to hear if you have a take on that.
Are you able
Well,
to repeat the question?
I'm.
Because I can't, but you know much more.
Do I need to repeat the question
just
before?
slightly.
Well, the question was about the relationship. Well, I'm now going to not do you justice with this question, but it was about the relationship between exterior and interior in architecture and how that might be. I'm obviously abbreviating here, and how that might apply to dress. The question was posed in relation to primitive architecture being very much, you're going to have to repeat it to me now. Well, functional.
The idea is that it's form, and then suddenly it's functioning, and then there's form, this elaboration. And with architecture, there's a history which you can trace, the ornamentation in the exterior and the adornment. Then there's the interior, which is modern architecture, the spatial qualities of that. What is the interior in fashion relative to the surface exterior facade? Is the interior us?
Well, the interior, and this is what we're talking about, and I think that the criticism leveled at fashion is that it's all exterior, that it doesn't have an interior, or that the interior is empty. And of course, this is what is contested with everyday life, is that it is anything but empty.
It's inhabited.
It's inhabited.
The way at least I like to think about that is that it goes back to your idea about you dress yourselves. You dress yourself now. Is that potentially that we are the interior, we're the spatial inside, we're the spatial quality that constructs that exterior and adorns ourselves with.
Yeah, the imagining body.
With this and this.
Yeah.
But that's why, in a way, the mannequin is such a weird thing, because it's replacing something that is so powerful in this dialogue. And so, if you remove the body and you replace it with a mannequin, then do you have only exterior? What do you do with that?
And that's what can make you sad.
And that's what can make you sad.
Is that you yeah.
Well, you sad.
Me
not
sad, not you sad. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Paul, Judith, and Adam, thank you so much. Let's give them another big round of applause. I neglected to say that this event has also been live streamed, and we thank UA Media for being here tonight to live stream this. So if you want to relive what you just went through, you can do it again tonight. You can see this. It's archived at the booksandbooks.com website, and it'll be available for you to see once again. Again, thank you all for coming. Thank you guys for an amazing discussion. You're welcome to hang around, and I want to tell you, you've heard about the project. It's open, just 2 or 3 doors down. So make sure you see it before you go. Thank you.